Hey, ladies and gentlemen, so now we're going to continue on in Unit 4, and we're going to do Unit 4 Learning Target 8. So now we're going to talk about what happens if there is no B term. Does that change our factoring? And the answer is no, and here's how. So let's take a look at this. So if there's no B terms, this is what I want you guys to write, just to give yourself an idea. Then you're going to place a 0 in the bottom of the x. So your sum is going to be 0. This is called differences of squares. So all that means is we need to find the same number times the opposite of itself that needs to add to the sum. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So for example, if we were to look at this one, we notice that there's no x term. There's no x term. So our A is going to be 1, our B is going to be 0, and our C is negative 9. Well, remember when you set up the x, you always multiplied your A times your C. So the top of our x is going to be negative 9, and the bottom of our x is going to be 0. So we need to figure out, just like we would before, what multiplies to a negative 9 and adds to 0. Well, let's take a look at what multiplies to 9. Well, we have a positive and a negative factor because we have a negative product. So what multiplies to 9? Well, we have 1 and 9 and 3 and 3. Well, the thing of it is we have to have the same number in order for it to add to 0. So I'm going to use 3 and 3. And now I'm ready to group. So even though there's no B term there, I'm going to act like there was. I'm going to put one in because I can do what I want. So I'm going to put in a plus 3x, and then I'm going to put in a minus 3x. And it's okay that I did that because if you were to add those two together, you would end up with 0. I didn't change the value of the problem. All I did was create 4 terms, so now I'm able to group. Between x squared and 3x, I can divide an x, so I'm dividing each of these terms by x. And then I'm left with x plus 3. Then there's a negative sign in the middle. So between 3x and negative 9, I need to take out a negative 3. So I'm dividing each of these by a negative 3. And then in that second parenthesis, I'm left with x plus 3. So here my leftovers are matching, so I can factor those out. Once I've pulled those out, I'm going to write what's left over, which is x minus 3. Okay? So this right here is your final answer for number 1. Next, let's take a look at number 2. It's really going to be a lot of the same thing. So we have x squared minus 49. Well, 1 times negative 49 is negative 49, and now our b is going to be 0. So what multiplies to negative 49 and adds to 0? Well, that's going to be a positive 7 and a negative 7. No big deal here. Again, I'm going to act like there is a b term. So I'm going to keep my first term the same, and now I'm going to create 2 terms in the middle based on what I found in the x. And I can do that because when you add these two together, it's still going to be 0. So now I can factor by grouping. Between x squared and 7x, you can divide out an x. X squared divided by x is just x. 7x over x is going to give you 7. Here there's a negative sign. Between negative 7 and negative 49, I can divide out a negative 7. So negative 7 divided by negative 7 is just x. Negative 49 divided by 7 is just 7. So here our leftovers are matching. Oops, I forgot to put that negative 7 out there. So I can take out the x plus 7, and then once I get rid of those, I get x minus 7. So there's opposite of each sign. Okay, now if you were to multiply this out using the box method, you would get there to be 0 in the middle. Now, here's the trick. In order for this to work, we have to have perfect squares. So in order for us to make sure we have perfect squares, we should always check to make sure there isn't a GCF. Well, between 2 and 8, you can actually divide out a 2. So I'm going to take and divide each of these terms by 2. So now I'm creating that GCF for my little sister. So now I have x squared minus 4. So I'm just going to focus on this part for my factoring. So I'm going to start by setting up my x. So here I'm going to multiply to a negative 4, and I don't have that middle term, so I'm adding to 0. Well, what multiplies to a negative 4 and adds to 0? That's going to be 2 and negative 2. So now I'm just going to focus in on this part. Again, I'm going to create those middle 2 terms by what I got in the x. And when you add those two together, you will still get 0. So this should be a negative. So now let's go ahead and let's factor by grouping. Between x squared and 2x, I can factor out an x. So I'm dividing each term by x, and I'm left with x plus 2. There's a negative sign between my two groups, so I'm going to take out a negative. Between 2 and 4, it's going to be a negative 2. So then I'm going to be dividing each term by a negative 2. Well, negative 2 over negative 2 is just going to leave me with x. Negative 4 divided by negative 2 leaves me with a positive 2. So x plus 2, x plus 2. I can go ahead and factor that out. Once I've gotten rid of that, I'm going to write what's left over, which is x minus 2. So, last but not least, we don't want to forget our little sister. So you want to make sure that GCF makes it all the way down. So this right there is your final answer for number 3. Let's take a look at number 4. So for number 4, again, we can take out a greatest common factor. That worked really well. All right, so we can take out a greatest common factor on number 4. So between 3x cubed and 3, we can actually take out, or 3x squared, my apologies, we can take out a 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide each of these terms by 3. So then we're left with x squared minus 1. So now we're multiplying to a negative 1 and adding to 0. So then that's going to be 1 and negative 1. I know it doesn't seem like it, but 1 times 1 is 1. So now I'm going to ignore my little sister for a while, just going to ignore her, and I'm going to focus on this guy right here. So I'm going to, again, create those middle two terms as if they had been there all along. Remember, it doesn't matter which order you put those factors in. Okay, so once we have it split up, again, you can create the middle because these two will still add up to 0. Let's factor by grouping. Between x squared and x, you can divide out an x, so each of these terms are divisible by x, and you're left with x plus 1. Here there's a negative sign in the middle, so I'm going to take out a negative. Between negative 1x and negative 1, I'm going to divide out a negative 1. Then that second parenthesis is going to become x plus 1. So this right here is our final answer, so we can factor that out. And once we get rid of that, we can write what's left over, which is x minus 1. So this right here is our final answer, except whoopsies, I forgot my little sister. My mom is crying right now. Make sure you put your GCF there after you've finished the problem. So let's go back and let's just do a little bit of a review of factoring in general. If you're good at factoring, you can go ahead and finish up the note sheet by hand. Need a couple more examples? I'll go ahead and talk you through them. So first thing we're going to do is this one, we're multiplying to a negative 21, and we're going to be adding to a negative 4. So things that multiply 21, 1 and 21, negative 7 and 3. So I'm going to do negative 7 and 3. And now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So I'm going to keep this the same. Okay, keep the first term the same, but then I'm going to split up negative 4x, and I'm going to write it as negative 7x plus 3x, and then again, that last term is going to stay the same. And now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So I'm going to make my two groups. Between x squared and 7x, I can divide out an x, and when I divide out an x, I'm left with x minus 7. Between 3 and 21, I can divide out a 3. Divide both terms by 3, and I'm left with x minus 7. So here I can go ahead and factor those on out. And once I get rid of those, I'm going to write what's left after that, which is x plus 3. So here's your final factored form. Notice that those two binomials are being multiplied. You do not need to put an addition sign between there. I saw that a couple of times on some of your guys' homework. So for number 6, we're going to take 3 times negative 5, which is negative 15. So we're multiplying to a negative 15 and adding to a positive 2. Well, since it's a negative product, we need a positive and a negative factor. So to multiply to a negative 15, I'm going to use positive 5 and negative 3 because that adds to a positive 2. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So I'm going to split just this middle term up. So I'm going to keep 3x squared the same. Now instead of writing 2x, I'm going to write 5x minus 3x and then the minus 5. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. Make my two groups. Between 3x squared and 5x, I can divide out an x, and then I'm left with x plus 5. Negative sign in the middle means I need to take out a negative GCF. Between 3x and 5, there isn't one, so I'm actually just going to divide everything by a negative 1, and that's going to change the signs of everything. So, oops, I forgot my 3 here. So now my leftovers are matching, so I can factor those out. And once I've factored those out, I'm going to go ahead and write what's left after that, which is x minus 1. So this right here is your final answer for number 6. Let's now take a look at number 7. So for number 7, I want to go ahead and we want to multiply negative 18 times negative 7. So to get to negative 18, multiply to negative 18, we need a positive and a negative factor. And then we want our 2 to be positive and our 9 to be negative so that we can add up to a negative 7. So now I'm going to rewrite this out. Instead of having negative 7x, I'm going to write that as 2x and negative 9x. And now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So make our 2 groups. Between x squared and 2x, I can take out an x, and then we're left with x plus 2. Between negative 9 and negative 18, I can take out a negative 9, and again, we're left with x plus 2. So my leftovers are matching, so I can factor those out. And then we're going to write what's left after that, which is x minus 9. So this right here is your final answer for number 7. Last but not least, let's take a look at number 8. So for number 8, we want to factor using the x. So I'm going to take 4 times 5, which is 20, and adding to 21. So we want to multiply to 20 and add to 21. So for some reason, this one really confuses students, but all we're going to do is use 20 and 1. So we have 4x squared plus 20x plus 1x plus 5. Again, I kept the first and last terms the same, and I just split up that middle term. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So I'm going to make my 2 groups. Between 4x squared and 20x, I can divide out a 4 and an x, and then I'm left with x plus 5. Between 1x and 5, I can't take anything out, so I'm going to divide out the 1 as a placeholder. So x and 5 are leftovers, so I can factor those out. And once I've got rid of those, I can write what's left after that, which is 4x plus 1 as my final answer. So that right there concludes your note sheet. Thanks for listening. Show me it when you're